Right now on Upfront.
Wisconsin warning.
You want your government fighting against fraud.
A big potential change to Wisconsin's multi-billion-dollar long-term care program, and the company at the center of it all now under fire in New York.
I think it's fair to say the process was tumultuous at best.
This Sunday, the new lawsuit in New York, the review now underway in Wisconsin, and the major concerns intensifying. New York State Senator James Skoufis is here.
End of an era.
No, it's tough. I mean, I was up till late at night to see the trade.
The Bucks trade Giannis to Miami, and the World Cup excitement set to explode on U.S. soil. Former Bucks executive and the New York World Cup host committee chair Alex Lasry is here with it all.
And battle for the first. One of four Democrats running to unseat Congressman Brian Stile on why he's the best to take him on.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. New concerns here in Wisconsin this weekend surrounding a proposed change to a multi-billion-dollar Medicaid program known as IRIS. It's Wisconsin's long-term care program.
Earlier this year, the Department of Health Services announced it planned to switch to a single company to administer the program. But that change is now under review, and the company the state selected was just sued in New York.
Just yesterday, we announced a Department of Justice lawsuit.
Vice President J.D. Vance in New York on the Justice Department lawsuit filed last week against public partnerships in the New York State Health Department. Accusations of Medicaid fraud, accusing New York of failing to police the company that oversees the state's home health care program. Public Partnerships is the same company the Wisconsin Department of Health Services said in January it plans to select to administer Wisconsin's multi-billion-dollar long-term care program called IRIS. With more than 29,000 participants across Wisconsin, the program's projected to cost more than $1.5 billion this year alone through state and federal Medicaid dollars. The program is a lifeline to Wisconsinites who need it, allowing elderly people and those with physical or developmental disabilities to essentially direct and manage their own care, everything from in-home assistance to caregivers and transportation.
People with disabilities are incredibly scared. They rely on these waiver services to stay in the community.
Jason Gloser is the executive director of the Coalition of Independent Living Centers.
I could see a situation where we see some administrative improvements based on this move. But based on what we've seen in other states, I can't say the same for the way the services will roll out to consumers.
The Wisconsin DHS announced in January it would switch from multiple companies to administer money and handle paperwork to one, Public Partnerships, the company under fire and facing a lawsuit in New York. But now Wisconsin is reviewing its decision after several official protests were filed. In those documents obtained by Upfront through an open records request, other competing companies say the change introduces unacceptable risk to participants, workers, and the state. The documents taking direct aim, accusations of real-world consequences experienced in other states following consolidation under public partnerships, including payroll disruptions, workforce instability, data exposure, and service interruptions. DHS declined to comment on the process, but on its website says the state anticipates better customer service, including faster vendor and response times. And in a statement, Public Partnership says it rejects the claims in the lawsuit unequivocally that rests on inaccurate allegations. The company wouldn't comment directly on the Wisconsin contract, but touted its 25 years of experience in 18 states nationwide and says the company maintains high satisfaction rates and enforcement.
And with that, James Skoufis is a Democrat state senator in New York who has raised concerns about public partnerships. He joins us now. Senator, welcome back to Upfront.
Thanks for having me.
So you held a hearing about a year ago focused on this company, Public Partnerships. What do you make of this DOJ lawsuit?
It's startling. I've mixed feelings. Certainly on one hand, as someone who has been raising concerns about PPL and our state's Department of Health and how this bid and this award came together for $9 billion here in my state, I'm not surprised with many of the allegations in the lawsuit. On the other hand, and by the way, this is a civil lawsuit we're talking about. There are no criminal charges, at least yet. that have been levied. On the other hand, I and many of my colleagues do have grave concerns about whether Donald Trump's Department of Justice can be impartial as they move forward and prosecute this lawsuit. And so we're in the early days. The lawsuit just dropped last week, and we're going to see how this proceeds in the coming weeks and months.
The New York Health Department has called this lawsuit baseless. Is it?
Yeah, I am not prepared to take that sort of knee-jerk response. Again, I've been, and many of my colleagues, by the way, Democrats and Republicans, have raised serious concerns about PPL and in particular the bidding, albeit the transition itself was a disaster for months after the award was granted to PPL. So it's, yes, the bidding that is my major concern, but the transition was a major mess. And so, I'm not prepared to say it's baseless because I've raised many of these concerns.
Senator, I want to ask you what you just mentioned on Public Partnerships has told us that the company has never lost a contract because of poor performance. I'm curious what you're seeing in your state, that transition you just referenced, and what are your biggest concerns in New York right now?
There were tens of thousands of enrollees. We call it the CDPAP program, the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program. And it has grown exponentially over the years to 250,000 people in this program. But the matter of fact is tens of thousands of them never actually even made it over to PPL during the transition because they ran into so many problems. They were months and months late with moving the balance of the individuals over to the program. There were thousands of caregivers who weren't getting paid during the early and middle parts of this transition. It was a full-blown disaster. And putting sort of the cherry on top of this mess was PPL was gaslighting lawmakers like myself. They were outright lying. In fact, at my hearing about a year ago, they lied under oath. And then they followed up with a letter to try and clean up their lie with another lie, it turns out, based on some of the emails that have come to light from the DOJ lawsuit. So Wisconsin is right to take a pause here and review everything before moving forward. As a New Yorker, I'm in no place to tell Wisconsin, what they should or should not be doing at the end of the day, but they should proceed with caution.
You mentioned the bidding and the transition as your main concerns with public partnerships. Is there anything that the company is doing well?
Well, look, the transition is long over. And I will say, after we got past that very tumultuous many-month period, operationally, things have calmed down. Things have been much, much smoother. When someone calls their helpline, they're not waiting for hours like they were in those early days. People are getting paid. The caregivers are getting their checks. And so operationally, things have significantly improved. There's no question, but there was a lot of damage and a lot of collateral damage in those early months. And certainly as someone who cares about integrity in government, I remain very concerned about how this award was procured, how this bid was decided upon in the first place.
Yeah, Wisconsin is also considering the same switch. What is your message to state officials here?
Look, consolidating these middlemen, we had 600 of them here in New York before moving to a single so-called fiscal intermediary. And so that type of conversation, I think, is important on behalf of taxpayers to be undertaking. But these are people's lives who depend on these types of programs that we're talking about. And so it's important that any state moves judiciously, cautiously, intelligently, with integrity. And I sure hope that Wisconsin learns from some of the mistakes that occurred here in New York.
Senator, quickly before you go, I want to ask you about your primary results in your state this past week. The last time we talked on this program, you were running for DNC chair. As a Democrat in New York, what would you tell Wisconsinites about the fact Democratic Socialists won really across the board in New York this past week?
Yeah, it was an interesting night earlier this week. And I'll say Wisconsin's not New York, first of all. No state is like one another. New York is uniquely interesting as it relates to our politics and especially our democratic politics. But the matter of fact is, there's a pendulum in our political system. And when the other guys are in the White House, Donald Trump now is in the White House, of course, the pendulum swings back the other way. Here in New York, that swing has been quite aggressive and quite sharp.
Yeah, here in Wisconsin, Francesca Hong is running as a Democratic Socialist for governor. Is this a wider moment among Democrats?
Look, the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, they're certainly having a moment. There's no question about it. They are speaking to an element of our base. And keep in mind, in these primaries, we have 5%, 10%, 15% voter turnout among the Democratic Party. And so the vast majority of folks are not weighing in our party in these primaries. But they're speaking to a base that feels as though the Democratic Party has ignored them. And that is something writ large the Democratic Party should be learning from and should be taking a lesson from. We have to do better.
James Skoufis, a Democratic state senator from New York. Senator, thank you for your time again. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
In the Democratic primary, Missy Hughes dropped out of the race this past week. She endorsed Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez and encouraged other candidates to drop out as well, as 6 now remain ahead of the August primary and our debate July 28th.
Up next, Giannis out, the World Cup heating up. Former Bucks executive and the head of New York's World Cup host committee, Alex Lazary, with us next.